Okay, so we're going to talk about the event filter and deep behavior framework that's been built inside MASSIVE-3. In order to demonstrate this properly, we need two viewpoints. So Adam's going to be watching. Can you hear me, Adam?
I can indeed, Jim.
And so I'm going to be doing some actions here, and Adam's going to be reporting on what he can see. In order to illustrate these different low-level behaviours properly, we've got an artificial 1 second delay between the two clients on the events only. So Adam can talk to me normally because we're not delaying the audio, so we can have a conversation. But any events such as items being moved in the world are subject to a 1 second delay, and that allows us to differentiate between the low-level behaviours of these different items. So the way things are going to work is I'm going to do some actions here. I'm going to talk about what I'm going to do before I do it, and then Adam's going to report on what he can see when he sees something change on his viewpoint. So we've got the normal massive online editor mole object palette down the right here, which shows a number of items. But instead of having standard low-level behaviours or common low-level behaviours from an infrastructure point of view for all of them, we've got a different infrastructure behavior for each item, and we're going to go through each in turn to demonstrate a number of different low-level behaviors. So the top item here, which is a wall, is subject to the normal behaviors, but everything is subject to this 1 second delay. So I'll create a wall, and Adam, if you can say when you see it, so we can see that delay. So I'm creating the wall now.
I can see it now.
So there you can see there's a short delay between my creating the wall and that event being propagated to Adam's replica and him being able to comment on it. So we'll get rid of that wall again because that's just a normal wall, and then we'll move on to some of the more interesting ones. So this first deep behavior is an example of delayed persistence. So this Keith Haring Batman picture is initially subject to normal optimistic local now consistency, so that'll make it very easy for me to maneuver to start with, and then after a short delay you'll notice some hard disk icons appearing above it, and that means it's subject to persistence on the server, and that my user client will only be able to see, in fact all of the user clients will only be able to see the persistent state of that object from that point onwards. And the idea here is to show that we can optimize the system to cope with the kind of behaviors we saw in the museum experiments, where people would create an object, they'd manipulate it rapidly and often in its early period of its existence, and then they'll tend to change it less frequently, but that the object gets more important the longer it lives because it starts being used as a landmark. So I'm going to create this object. Adam, if you can say when you see it being created.
All right.
I'll manipulate it, and then it'll become persistent. And Adam, again, if you can tell me when you can see it become persistent. So I'm creating it now.
Right, I can see the object now.
So I'll maneuver it, and notice it's very interactive at the moment, very easy to change, and then put it down. And you'll notice it's now become persistent. So now the same 1 second high latency network simulation that Adam was subject to, I'm going to be subject to as well. So whereas previously, before it became persistent, this object was being updated in my local replica immediately, so I wasn't subject to any delays. Now I'm only seeing the persistent state of this object. So the current position of this picture has been written to stable storage, and now every change I make to it I'll only be able to see at my local client once it's been made persistent. So if I move it up, I can see it move. Can you see it move, Adam?
I can indeed, yep. It's
Okay.
moved up to the top.
So I'm going to move it down, and Adam, if you could say I can see it as soon as you can see the change, and I'll do the same.
All right.
I can see it.
I can see it.
So there you go. You can see we're both subject to the same delays over the high latency network simulation, because we're both seeing the persistent state of this object. So whereas before I could see its state as soon as it was updated by me, now I can only see it once it's been sent to the server, made persistent, and then sent back to me. So we're both subject to the same delays there. And that's an example of being able to dynamically change the consistency mechanism of an artifact in the virtual world. So now we're going to talk about the second deep behavior, which is the batch updates behavior. So the idea of this behavior is that if you've got a virtual world which is accessed over a low bandwidth, high latency connection, you might not be able to distribute all updates, especially to things like geometries or textures or other media. So you'd like to be able to send those out in a batch, maybe on a CD, through the mail or whatever. And so in order to enable that, we've got deep behavior, which allows you to update an object immediately and see a desired position for that update, and then at some period later for the world, everyone, to be able to agree on a new position after a batch period. So if I create this object, and Adam, if you can let me know when you can see it.
Yeah, okay.
So I've created it.
I can see the object now.
Okay, so once again you can see the effect of the high latency network simulation there. So I saw it straight away because I've got optimistic consistency on this object. Adam saw it only once it had gone to the server over the high latency network and then had been sent to his replica. So now I've got this item where I can see the object now. If I make an update to it, what will actually happen is a proxy item will be created, which will exist for the period of the batch. And then once the batch finishes, then both objects will reconcile. So if I move it, Adam, let me know when you can see the proxy.
See the proxy.
I can see the proxy. And now we can see the single object again. So what's actually happening with that proxy is it's being created in a new aspect that both Adam and I are subscribed to, but not everyone would need to subscribe to that aspect. So the aspect contains the proxies which represent new item positions at some time in the future once a batch is completed, whereas other users would see the actual position only. So they wouldn't care about the proxy objects, they wouldn't care about the pending updates, they'd only see the updates once they were reconciled with the real world. So if I show you that again, I'm going to move the object. I can see the proxy.
I can see the proxy now.
And now the two reconcile. So if we were only subscribed to the base aspect, it would be at that point when we'd see the actual update happen. So that's the second one. So if we now move backwards again, and we'll move on to the next one. So this next example is an example of the leasing mechanism. So the idea with the lease is that, once again, we're trying to create a situation which will support high latency, low bandwidth access to a virtual environment. And so we want the system to be able to reason about when things are valid. And the idea with a lease is it's saying that this object will be valid for a certain period of time. So in this example, I'm going to create an object. It's going to be subject to a 30-second lease, during which time no one can change it. And during that period, all of the running clients will be able to reason about that object and will be able to know that it's not going to change. So for example, they might like to cache it in preference because they know it's not going to change for a certain period of time. If they have cached it, they know they can present it as the user as valid without actually changing, without checking the validity of that object. So if I create the object, tell me when you see it, Adam. Okay, I can see it.
Yep, I can see it now.
And you'll see it's got a little padlock at the top saying it's subject to a lease. So if I try and move it, you'll notice that it's just denying any movements. I can't change it at all. I can't pick it up.
I can see that too.
So Adam can't move it either.
Nope.
And then hopefully in a little while the lease will disappear. So that's Adam trying to move it. You can see that laser beam coming out of his eyeballs. So hopefully in a few seconds the lease has now disappeared. So Adam, if you want to try and move it.
Okay.
So now I'm subject to the latency because there's a high latency network simulation. So you see Adam can now move it, and if I try and move it now, you see I can move it. So it's now following me. So in practice, actually, the opposite would generally occur. So people would move an object into a position, and then they'd apply a lease once they were happy with it, once they've decided that's where it's going to be. So just for the sake of this experiment, we had the lease appearing straight away, but in practice you would manipulate an object into a position, and then you'd apply a lease at a certain point. So now we move on to the last demonstration of the event filter and deep behavior framework, and that's the variant deep behavior. So the idea here is that we can create an object that is and then we can create a variance of it. So I'm going to create an object. I'm going to move it around, and hopefully Adam shouldn't see those updates or the object being created, because I've created a subjective variant in my own personal aspect. And then Adam would also be able to create a variant item that I won't be able to see. He'll be able to move it around, but I won't be aware of those changes. And we'll create two variants of the same object, and then if we had a different custom user client, we'd be able to subscribe to all of those different aspects. We'd be able to see all the different variants of the item, and then we'd be able to use a mechanism to decide which is the definitive version, which everyone will see. So I'm going to create this object. Adam, if you could tell me if you see this item, and hopefully you shouldn't be able to.
Okay then.
So I've created the picture. Adam, can you see it?
Nope, can't see a thing.
Right, so that's been created in my own personal variant aspect. But you'll notice it still, from my point of view, coexists with all the other objects in the world. But from Adam's point of view, it doesn't exist. So Adam, you should be able to see 3 pictures in the world that we've created so far. Can you?
Yep, I can indeed. Just 3 behind me.
And I can see the 3 that Adam's talking about there, and also this variant item in front of me. So I can modify this variant in the normal way. I can drag it around. I can pick it up and carry it with me, and then I can drop it. But Adam, you didn't see anything happen other than me walk around, hopefully.
Nope, not a thing.
Right, so now if we want to do it in the other way around, so Adam, if you scroll your palette down to the bottom,
Yep.
and then click on the Liechtenstein WAM picture.
Okay, so I've got one picture in front of me now.
So I
can move it around.
I can't see anything other than Adam moving around, manipulating nothing. So once again, the object's been created in
now.
The object's been created in Adam's personal variant aspect, so he can modify things, and I can see the aspect that his embodiment exists in, but I can't see the aspect in which he's created this variant item. So now we've got 2 items which are in some senses the same object, but in some senses we're seeing different versions of them. So I've got, if I go over and stand by my version of that picture, it's over here. And Adam, if you go and stand by your version.
Yep, I am indeed standing just in front of it.
So we've got the same object in some senses, but it's got 2 different versions. Adam's version is over by him, over there, and my version is just by me over here. And then we could use a custom user client to view both of those versions, and an administrator could decide on which was the actual definitive version that everyone else should see when they visited the virtual world. And so the obvious use of that is that we've got a kind of optimistic access control mechanism that allows us to create objects and create versions and in some senses change the world, but we can't actually vandalize the definitive version. We can just create options that then some administration task could be to then decide on which is the definitive version. So if we've both just created a picture here, but if Adam had come in and all the objects had been subject to this variant behavior, he could demolish the whole world. He could graffiti over things. He could put stuff in the world that maybe most other people don't want to see, but no one else would see that because the objects would be subject to the variant behavior. And then, but then again, if he'd come along and made some good changes to the world that were generally acceptable, then a subsequent administration step could authorize those changes, and they could become a definitive part of the world. So that's the end of this video demonstration of the deep behavior and event filter framework. Thanks very much.